Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of our podcast, a talk show called Agents of Change. So, in this podcast, we'll be interviewing change makers. We'll be trying to dive into the lives, minds, and hearts of change makers and try to see whether we can find some clues so that we can apply it in our own lives. So, today we are very fortunate. I'm very excited that His Grace Vraj Vihari Prabhu is with us. Vraj Vihari Prabhu is a very senior monk, 20 plus years experience. He's an international preacher. He's traveled the globe. He's an excellent writer. He's written more than 1,000 articles and 4 books. He's a mentor, and above all, he's a very wonderful devotee. He's really concerned about everyone. You can actually feel it in his writing, in his lectures, his deep concern. So very grateful that Vraj Vihari Prabhu is with us. He's taken his precious time to be here. So thank you very much, Prabhuji, for taking your time to be with all of us.
Thank you, Achyut Gopal Prabhu, for your very, very kind introduction.
So today is Ramchandra Vijayotsav. Today is also the appearance day of Madhvacharya. I think it is a very auspicious day to begin this podcast, my first episode, with the blessings of Madhvacharya. And all the more because you are from the Madhva family. You were born in Udupi. So the first thing that I wanted to know is what has been your family background, being connected to Udupi, being born in a Madhva family, and whether that has any connection with you joining ISKCON. Can you throw some light on that?
My parents, we are from the Madhva background, Madhva Udupi's Brahmin family. However, philosophically, I didn't know much about Madhvacharya till I joined ISKCON. I think it is Srila Prabhupada's mercy that helped me understand and appreciate Advaita Vedanta, and Achintya Veda Tattva, and understand what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us the most evolved philosophy. However, I must confess that my parents and my grandparents' love and the value system and the samskaras they gave me has had a deep impression in my heart. So definitely, I owe a lot to them. But I'm not sure whether I owe the philosophical understanding to them. I definitely owe my value systems and my principles to them and their upbringing. But philosophically, see, Madhvacharya is always sitting like this, you see. To say that the soul and the Lord are different. Shankaracharya said, we all are one. And Madhvacharya said, we are two. Soul is different, God is different. So when I was a young boy, I spent my first 10 years with my grandparents in Udupi. My grandfather was a priest. In the Udupi Krishna Matha. So I would take prasadam daily in the temple. I would visit the temple. And in our temple altar at home, also we had different gods and Krishna. And we also had Madhvacharya's photo. And because I was a young boy, I was fond of, children have their Annamaya kosha. They like to eat all the time. So I used to always keep eating. So my grandfather would always take me and he would point out to Madhvacharya's photo and he would tell me, see, Madhvacharya is telling you that you should eat only 2 times a day, not more than 2 times. So this is how I grew up, and when I was a teenager, I wondered a few times, why is Madhvacharya sitting like this? Then I would remember what my grandfather told me as a young boy, you should eat only twice. And then I would laugh over it and then I would forget it. But only when I came to ISKCON, I understood the significance of, because ISKCON is a preaching mission, In Madhvacharya, in Udupi, one of the biggest strengths of the Udupi Sampradaya is they maintain tradition. And that has to be maintained, the purity, the power of the traditions. You can feel that. So I owe a deep sense of gratitude, actually. I feel very grateful to my family. And philosophically, because of the preaching mission of Srila Prabhupada, I understood Madhvacharya better. And I'm able to appreciate Madhvacharya's contribution. Thanks to Srila Prabhupada.
Somewhat similar to my story also. I was born in the Shri Sampradaya family. Even though our birthplace is Kanchipuram, I really didn't have any appreciation for Ramanuja. Only after coming to ISKCON, After that,
Yeah.
every summer vacation, we would go to Kanchipuram and go to the Varadaraj temple, spend time there. Never understood. After I came to ISKCON, then I understood the value of Kanchipuram and Ramanuja.
Yeah.
So ultimately, yeah, we have to be very grateful to Srila Prabhupada that he's actually helped us understand Madhvacharya, Ramanuja. Prabhuji, you have been, can you tell us something about how you came in Krishna consciousness? What was like the start? You have done your MBA, right?
Yeah. I did my master's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was, my father was very spiritually inclined, my mother also. So they would every day perform their spiritual activities, prayers. And my father would read spiritual books, and he would tell me often that I should look for a guru and things like that. But then he also encouraged me to pursue my career. And at one point of time, I began to read a few books, of different spiritual organizations. And I was searching, I was flirting with different paths. And then I came to ISKCON, and nothing exciting, but yeah. But I think what really touched my heart deeply was Srila Prabhupada's books. The initial days when I read, I remember I would lose a sense of time. And also Srila Prabhupada's voice, his classes when I would hear. So when Srila Prabhupada would say that, I would experience a sense of shelter far beyond what this world was offering me at that point of time. So I guess it was Srila Prabhupada's personality and a few brahmachari preachers, devotees whom I got very attached to, just seeing the aura they exuded, and my own spiritual master. So basically, I think a combination of many factors, and of course prasadam. I think all of this, and also the philosophy, the classes, the kirtans, I think everything, as they say in China, that it takes 7 people to make a horse drink water. So it's not, it's one person's job. So I guess a lot of factors were involved.
Correct.
And I'm very grateful to all of them.
Great. So you have been writing for almost now more than 10 years. You have entered into writing.
I would say, 12 years, 12, 13 years,
How did you get into this world of writing? I mean, when did you recognize that there is a writer within you?
Oh, okay. Writing, see, I've been writing since childhood. I've been writing journals and poems.
I see.
So I have a lot of poems and journals, but I don't publish them. It's just in my notebooks, and then after a few years, I put them in Nirmalya. So journals I've been writing. But for me, journal writing is something like, it's like somebody spending time with his family. For me, journal writing is not a means. It's an end in itself. It's my me time. But writing as a contribution is last 12 years. In the sense, writing to serve the society, writing to share my thoughts, writing as a means of teaching. Just like you give lectures, I also write articles. So that particular systematic writing I started since 2008-9. And so that's been my writing journey. So I've been writing diaries and since I was a teenager, I guess. Yeah.
So if someone wants to begin writing, what would be your advice to such a person? How does one start?
Okay. So first is, why do you want to write? See, writing could be either as a means of expression, to express to the world what you have to share, or writing could be a means of discovery also, like to know what is there within you. So for me, writing began as a means of discovery, to know myself better. So then there was a natural evolution and progression to transforming writing into a means of contributing or making an impact or giving it to the world or sharing. So sharing came much later. So contribution came later, connection was first. So my one of my value systems or one of my mission has been, connect first and then contribute. So if you are looking at writing to make an impact, great, go ahead. But if you've never written, then I would suggest to such devotees, such friends, is then why don't you start using writing as a tool for connection, and then you could then you will have clarity on your value systems and what you really want to offer the world and things like that. And then you could take writing to the next level of contribution. So that's the way you could progressively take it forward.
So connecting with yourself through writing means journal writing, expressing.
Journal writing. Yeah.
Free writing, basically.
Free writing. There are different types of journal writing. So yeah, basically writing to connect to yourself.
Got it. So you have written this book, Mind Your Mind.
Yeah.
Latest book. So in this book, you speak about 3 principles for happy living.
Yeah.
You speak about awareness, acceptance, aspiration. So these are like very powerful principles. Can you elaborate a little more about these principles?
Okay. Oh, I would love to. This has been very close to my heart. Thank you, Achal Gopal Prabhu, for asking a question on Mind Your Mind. See, it's basically very simple. Awareness means to know what's happening right now. Like, for example, if I ask you, you don't have to answer my question, but what is your mind talking right now? Like for me, my mind is saying, okay, at 4:45, remember at 4:45 you have to meet someone, mind is reminding me. So awareness means to separate the mind from the self, to know what the mind is speaking, or to know where I am or what thoughts I'm getting. So that is awareness. So it is the first step in happy living, to separate ourselves from our internal clutter. And I'll give an example later of a case study which basically convinced me about these 3 principles. So this is awareness. And acceptance is extremely important. Acceptance is when you realize or when you are aware of what's happening within you. Then what do? Do you judge yourself? Do you criticize yourself? Because if you do that, that means it's again the mind taking over. That means your awareness is gone away. So acceptance means to come to peace with what the mind is saying or where the mind is. Means not judging yourself, accepting the way you are, accepting that the mind's tantrums, the mind's chatter is not you. So you don't judge yourself, you just accept it. So you become peaceful by awareness and acceptance. Like for example, if you are attentive while chanting and if you are really present, like one of the gifts that the holy name gives us is awareness. You understand that, I have a lot of anartha, a lot of unwanted things in my heart. Then what do? At that moment, if you accept yourself, okay, to accept that I'm fallen or to accept that I'm having lust is, I think, the real challenge. So when I accept, okay, this is where I am. That's a platform of peace. Awareness is, it's a gift that Krishna gives you because you're attentive in your practices.
So awareness comes from being attentive.
Attentive, being present, being mindful. So then awareness is a gift you receive, and then acceptance is your gift to Krishna. When you lead an authentic life, when you accept yourself the way you are, and from that platform you can march forward with the 3rd principle, which is aspiration. In the deep core of ourselves, we want to connect to Krishna. We call Krishna. Somebody may refer to Krishna, God, as a universe or as a force, or as maybe they love Lord Shiva or maybe Christ or whatever. Basically, a force, a power beyond us. So when we aspire to connect to a divine force which is beyond us, so when we have all 3 principles, what happens is I'm aware of where the mind is and I accept myself the way I am, and then I connect to my aspirations, and then I can slowly march forward in my journey without making a wreck of myself. So I'll give a simple case study, okay, where these 3 principles are in action. I took a yatra, a pilgrimage to Vrindavan a few years ago in the month of Kartik. And the last 2 days, the temples are extremely crowded. And I'm a person who loves being in seclusion. And I gave a talk in the evening saying that tomorrow is the last day of Kartik and we have to be in the temple to get mercy of the Lord, blah, blah, blah. I gave a big pep talk. Okay. So I was leading a group. So next morning at 4 o'clock, we were all rushing into the temple and I froze in fear. terror gripped me because I realized that there are 4,500 people in that small temple hall in Krishna Balram temple in the morning at 4:30, and I can't stand a crowd more than 25 people. And then I said, no, I can't go in. And then my mind started, oh, you're a great preacher. You tell everyone, and now you're a hypocrite. And then, okay, I want to go in, but the same mind which is urging you to go in, the very next moment the mind tells you, no, you can't go in. The mind is gripped with fear. The mind is kind of schizophrenic. Mind has dual personalities. Mind will say something and the mind will say the exact opposite thing a second later. So this made me so stressful. So at that moment, I just paused. I sat in a corner in my room, just near my room. It was close to the temple. And I breathed, I inhaled, I exhaled, I relaxed for a few moments. And I entered the space of awareness, which means I realized when I was present, I understood what's happening. My mind is telling me not to go to the temple hall, and the mind is telling me you should go to the temple hall because you have preached to the people to go to temple hall. So my mind is fearful of going to temple hall. So you see the language I'm using. My mind is telling me don't go to that. My mind is feeling like this. So what is happening is I'm separating myself from my mind. So this awareness was liberating, because just when I realized that, I'm feeling, see, there's a difference between feeling fearful and being aware that you are fearful. That's a lot of difference. Because when you feel fearful, the feeling takes over. But when you are aware, you retain the choice, you retain some independence. That you have a chance of redemption. You have a chance of escaping the torture of the mind. So that awareness was the first step. So when I was in that space of awareness, I understood what's happening within me. Then I entered the second space. I accepted myself. If I had beaten myself harder, saying that, you're a fool, then that would have been the mind again playing tantrum. So I said, it's okay to be fearful. It's perfectly okay to not like the crowds. But the mind was saying, but today is the last day of Kartik. You don't want mercy. You are going to get grace and Vrindavan Dham and you're running away. You are a hypocrite. You don't want Krishna's mercy. So then again, my mind is now chastising me. It's okay. It's okay. So basically, accepting my psychophysical nature was a very important, crucial second step. And the third was gentle, because just like in a husband-wife relationship, when you listen to your spouse, even if you don't give solutions, but you just listen to your spouse, she or he feels understood. And then there is a chance that your spouse will understand you. Because you have understood your spouse. Similarly, when I was in a space of awareness and acceptance, it was like telling my wife, quote and unquote, whom I call Chanchal. I call my mind as Chanchal in my journals. It is like, like Stephen Covey says, you understand first and then you seek to be understood. So first, I was understanding the mind. Yes. I was aware and I accepted myself the way I am. So then came the third, which is aspiration. Now this is when gently telling the mind, dear mind, we have come to holy dham of Vrindavan, Krishna's abode. But these three principles are incomplete without the fourth principle, which is take it easy, be gentle with yourself. So what happened? I came to the temple hall, but I came on the western side. I entered the door and I stood very close to the door, exit gate. And after a few minutes, I would rush outside, inhale fresh air, then again come back inside the temple hall, stand for a few minutes in the Mangalarati, then again go out. So that way my mind was pacified. And this is not that, it's not that I planned on a diary, it happened spontaneously. It's a rhythmic dance because of the practices of awareness, acceptance and aspiration. So what happened at the end of it was, I attended the spiritual program which I had preached about and which gives you a lot of spiritual benefits. I did practice those spiritual principles, but I had also been considerate with my psychophysical nature. And because of awareness and acceptance, I could aspire and I could pursue my aspiration and I could move forward in my journey. look at what would have happened otherwise. If I didn't have awareness, acceptance, and aspiration, I would have either forced myself to go to the temple hall, and my mind would have kept protesting, and I would have got really stressed, and I would have got mentally fatigued. Or the second option is, I would have withdrawn myself and gone into a guilt trip, I would have felt very guilty for not going to the temple hall. So I would have been miserable either way. But now, because of awareness, acceptance, and aspiration, I was able to reconcile my mind's needs and my heart's entering to serve and be with Krishna. So this is a very simple example, a very simplistic example I've given about how awareness, acceptance, and aspiration, which is like a triangle, and inside the triangle is the main important principle of dealing with yourself gently. So if you practice this, I'm sure we will be able to live with ourselves more peacefully.
So awareness is basically like Radhanath Maharaj in his journey home. He gives this that when he was sitting near the Ganga, meditating. So sometimes if you are in the water, you are caught up. So if you come outside, you can see the chaos, but then you are not part of it. So basically trying to make that separation.
Yeah, separating yourself from your mind is extremely important.
Yeah. One thing about acceptance is many times when we compare ourselves with others, so then acceptance becomes a big challenge. So how do you deal with this disease of comparison? Just accepting yourself the way you are, with the positives, negatives, with your weaknesses, especially in today's age where there is the social media, and so much comparison.
Yeah, see, this can be addressed intellectually and experientially. Intellectually, we know, the internet is filled with a lot of tools and techniques, and YouTube videos will teach you how not to compare yourself with others. I won't get into the intellectual analysis about comparison, how it is bad and how you can overcome it, etc. No, I will give you a simple tool by which you could experience freedom from comparison and the liberating experience you have. So what you could do, what anybody could do, if you have a challenge of comparison and complaining and being in that space, is you practice what is called as fresh gratitude. A life centered on thanking Krishna, thanking God for the gifts that you received in the last, say, 24 hours or the last 1 week. Generally, we have been brainwashed since childhood to live in a gap space. We always live in the gap. What I didn't get in life, or I want this and I have not got this. So we always keep looking at the gap. What I'm proposing, because I read it in the internet somewhere long time ago, and it really resonated with me. Instead of the gap space, let us live in the gain space, which means, okay, I got this much, I got this, I got that. So what happens when you live in the gain space constantly? Then you feel grateful, and in that space of gratitude, you can up your ante. You can actually move forward. You can actually have higher targets. You can actually achieve more without the pressure of others harassing you, subconsciously. Because you are competing with yourself, and you're not competing actually, essentially. Because you're grateful at heart, you are joyful, you feel complete, and you are inspired to move forward. But if you live in the gap space, even if you achieve, even if you're doing well, you'll always keep comparing with others, because you've been trained, you have actually told yourself that I'm inadequate. I'll give a simple example. When you get up in the morning, first thing what comes to your mind? Oh, I slept only 5 hours, I'm sleep deprived, I should have slept a little more. That means you have entered the gap space. Or if as soon as I get up, thank you Krishna, another fresh day awaits me. Thank you Krishna, yesterday this thing happened to me. So you entered a gain space. So if you have a culture of a practice of living in the gain space, then we are essentially happy with ourselves. And then comparison goes off. But you can't totally avoid it in this modern day and age, because it's an age of social media. So therefore, the first most important principle of not getting trapped by what others are doing is to connect with yourself, either through journal writing or chanting or praying or living in the gain space, expressing gratitude to Krishna and accepting yourself the way you are. So through these practices, consciously chosen practices, we can to a certain extent humanize ourselves from comparison.
Yeah, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj puts it, I was reading his Spiritual Warrior series, so he explains that his aunt had this mantra, blessed.
Sorry, can you come again?
His aunt, she was going through a lot of struggles, but every time anyone would ask her how you are, she would say, I am blessed by the best.
Wow, I am blessed by the
best.
best.
So
that's beautiful.
That was Bhaktivedanta Maharaj's mantra also. Even though he had cancer at the end, this was what he was chanting. Yeah. Suji, in your aspiration part, I think in the book you mentioned that story about that lady who was in that fort with Shivaji.
Yeah.
That's a very beautiful story. Can you explain that story? And how it helps us basically deal with the mind?
Yeah, Hirkani Bai, she was in the fort. She would come to the fort every day to sell her wares. But the fort would close in the evening at sunset. So she had to leave the fort before the sunset. And this was situated at the top of the Sahyadri mountains. And it was Shivaji's, that was the place that Shivaji protected himself from the wily Mughals at that time. This was in the mid 17th century. So Hirkani Bai, one day, Hirkani Bai was selling her wares in the fort at Raigad. So she was late one day because you had to leave the fort before sunset. Otherwise, the gates would be closed. And guards had strict orders from Emperor Shivaji. So she got a little late, and the guard said, we can't make an exception. You'll have to stay inside the fort for the night. And she said, no, but my baby is crying. She had to go back to her village, Pachad. So she insisted, and the guards refused. So then she said, how can I keep my little one crying? So she thought, I'm going to get out of the fort and I'm going to get on from one of the exits. Now this fort is at the top of a mountain, 3,000 feet above sea level, and we are talking about mid 17th century. And very risky, and there's a forest. Even if she comes down the mountain through the edges, then she has to walk through the forest, which is filled with dangerous animals. But she was determined. She knew that on one section of the fort, there were no guards because the fort was in such a position, it was so steep fall that nobody would dare to climb that. The greatest of military generals wouldn't dare to do that. So she thought this is the only chance she had. And believe it or not, she actually climbed that spot. She stood on the edge, and then she came down warding off bats, snakes, so many crazy things in the dark. It was actually a very spooky night. It's in a village in one sense, but she managed to come down, and then she went to the forest. She went to her house, and then the next morning she was back in the fort to sell her wares in the morning. So when she came back the next morning, the guard was about to leave because his night shift had got over, and he was shocked to see the lady come back from this side. He said, but I had refused to let you go last night. But I went to that particular spot. He was shocked. Alarm bells were raised. That means there is a security breach. That means there is some loophole in our system. So Emperor Shivaji himself came to see this, and he asked her, how did you get out? And when she explained to him, he said, can you take me to that place? She took Emperor Shivaji to that place. She showed him the spot. And then Emperor Shivaji asked her, can you do that feat again today? She said, yes. Very confidently, she climbed up the steps. She went on the edge of the fort. And at that point of time, when she saw the imposing sight below, she was shaken. She said, no, my dear king, I can't do it. She started crying. And then Shivaji asked her, but yesterday you could do it. She said, no, but I can't do it now. And Shivaji smiled because he knew she was speaking the truth, because her clothes were soiled and hands were bruised. So he knew that she had actually climbed down, which great military generals would not even imagine in their wildest dreams of doing it. She did it because she had an aspiration. She had a purpose, and that was her baby. So her child had empowered her to perform a task which was humanly impossible. And in fact, Shivaji honored her by naming that spot as Hirkani Burj, the bastion of Hirkani, the place where Hirkani showed tremendous bravery. So this is an example, a classic example of how we can transcend the limitations of mind when we have an aspiration greater than the mind. So this story I often quote.
That's a very powerful story. Very
Yeah.
powerful. So all our limitations can be overcome if our purpose is big.
Yeah.
If the purpose is big, then actually we can do anything.
Yeah. At the same time, we have to honor, there is something called as Maryada. We have to honor the limitations that nature has given us. We have been given a certain body, certain physical structure. We need to honor that, and we need to live within those Maryada. It's like, for example, you can't say, I have a passion to fly, and you can't stand on the terrace of your building and you can't say that I'm going to fly like a vulture, like an eagle. No, you can't wait just because, you are unique, you are special. A crow is different from a swan. What oil can do, water cannot. What wood can do, steel cannot. Everyone is unique. What an ant can do, a crab cannot. But each one of them has a place in this universe. So if we understand our unique position, and then we nurse a healthy aspiration, we will evolve. So that's the way we need to move forward. Yeah.
So then how do you find your strengths, that uniqueness? How do you find it?
See, there are many how you do it questions, and I don't really have answers. It's a journey. It's unique for each one of us. The more time we spend with ourselves, the more we connect to ourselves. See, if you're looking for a pill that I swallow and I get all the answers, I don't have such pills, because we live in an age when we look for immediate quick fixes and answers. But life is not beginning with this birth and it doesn't end with my death. We are on a long journey through many lifetimes. So we need to honor this gift of Krishna, and we need to trust ourselves and spend some time connecting to ourselves, connecting to Lord, and we will discover our strengths. And of course, we have tools. We have journal writing, we have prayers, we have good association, we have counseling, we have career counselors. So there are a lot of professional help. There is a lot of professional help available. We can access that. At the same time, we need to also trust ourselves, our own intuition, and we need to connect to ourselves. So there is no substitute for the hard work in our inner life. So that's what I would give more preference to.
So you also speak in your lectures about wants, needs, and understanding your feelings.
Correct.
Can you explain what is the difference between wants and needs?
See, I was very fascinated when I first time read Marshall Rosenberg's Non-Violent Communication, and that book had a profound effect on me, because I could see that when I connect to my needs and my feelings, I have clarity and I feel more authentic. I feel more aligned to my authentic self. Now, having said that, I know what you are saying. Sometimes we have desires and we confuse those desires with our needs, right? Is that what you're saying? So how do we distinguish? Now we need to understand needs are universal. Needs are something which all of us have. But desires are strategies that we use, that the mind uses to fulfill our needs. Like for example, healthy food, good food, enjoyment, or I wouldn't say enjoyment, maybe the wrong word. Nice food is a need. We all have a need for eating good food. But if I say I insist on a chocolate every day or a pizza every day with the particular specifications, so that is a desire, because that is a strategy I'm using to fulfill my need of good food. Now, health, physical fitness is a need. We all have a need to be healthy, and that's okay to have that need. But if I insist on playing football every day, football is a desire. Playing football is a desire. So needs and desires are differentiated by the strategies that we use. Now, for example, love is a need. It's universal. Now people have different strategies to take care of their needs. Some people may enter into a sexual relationship. Some people may fulfill that need of love through a beautiful spiritual experiences. Some people feel loved when they spend time in nature. Or basically, there are different strategies different people use, but the needs are universal. And at different times, different needs surface. And when those needs are fulfilled or when they are not fulfilled, we get different feelings. So when you recognize your needs and your feelings, when you're just simply aware, that helps you have a sense of balance. You know where you are. My awareness improves. I'm in the space of awareness. When I pick out my needs and feelings card and I see my needs, oh, what am I needing right now? What am I feeling right now? Immediately, I'm able to separate myself, separate the self, the real I, from my needs. So that helps a lot. So that's how I separate needs from desires.
Okay, so for example, if someone is having fear,
okay,
can you explain how he can deal with that fear with those three principles of awareness, acceptance, and aspiration?
Okay. Fear. So let's say fear of what? I gave an example of fear of crowd.
Yeah, you gave an example. Yeah.
So same way you could replace that fear of crowd with something else. So let's say somebody has a fear of old age, or say insecurity. Correct. What will happen to me when I'm old, or sickness, or what if I get cancer? So this is fear. So this fear is there. So awareness by practice of journal writing, breathing, pranayam, chanting, attention in our spiritual practices, at least we have to enter that space of awareness first. Okay, fine. I have this fear. My mind has a fear of disease, a fear of cancer. Acceptance is, it's okay. It's okay to have this fear. I am vulnerable. I am ordinary. Just because I have a fear doesn't mean I am bad. So when I say it's my mind's fear, it's like you are having a compassionate look on your mind. It's basically you're separating yourself. And when you don't, generally what happens is we judge ourselves. How can you be fearful? You are a devotee. You are practicing spiritual life. You should overcome your fear. Don't instruct. Don't chastise. Don't judge. It's all right to be fearful. Like somebody asked me that day recently, Prabhu, can you give class tomorrow? No. In the evening, morning he asked me, can you give class today evening to some group? I said no. Today I'm very unhappy, and I had some bad experience, and then something happened in my distant family, and I'm a little sad. I don't think I'm in a good space. He said, Prabhu, you are sad, but you should always be happy, right? I said, no, I'm sad, and I'm okay. I'm not happy today, but I'm okay because I'm okay not being happy, because we have another obsession. We think I have to always be happy all the time. No. Right now, I'm in a space of anxiety, and there is a little bit of melancholy which has gripped me, but I'm okay. So what I'm saying is accepting yourself the way you are, even accepting your fear. It's okay, I'm fearful. And when you say that to yourself, when you accept your fear, you are vulnerable. And vulnerability is a strength actually. If you are vulnerable to the right person at the right time, like we have Krishna, we have God, or we have a close friend. So that acceptance gives you strength. So if you have fear, don't chastise yourself, just accept it and gently move forward.
Koji, you have been in the ashram for so many years. Can you tell us some of your interactions with Radhanath Maharaj? Any specific experience that has really changed your life, or that you always remember and cherish?
Yeah, there are many beautiful moments with His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj. I'm very grateful to for his association and his kindness upon me. I think one of the most amazing things I have learned from my spiritual master and observing him is he is the most non-judgmental person I have met. So he is the one who taught me by his example to trust myself, to accept myself the way I am. Generally there's so much of fear and so much of insecurity and anxiety that we put on ourselves. But I would say Maharaj always had a, it's not just physically he would embrace me, but also the mood of warmth that he exuded has been my biggest wealth that I've got from him. The biggest treasure that I've received from my spiritual master. And also his natural devotional service, his natural attraction to the Lord. I would just like to narrate one incident which convinced me of this. When I was in Kumbh Mela in January 2000, he was in the tent, preaching tent, where he was answering questions, and there was an IAS officer, who was a very sophisticated, smart young man. He was asking challenging questions to Maharaj about his Jewish faith, and he said, you should have continued in your Jewish faith, and why did you have to convert to Hinduism and become a practitioner of ISKCON? And Maharaj gave a very diplomatic answer initially, telling him that all paths are same, and we can experience God anywhere. But this man kept insisting, then why did you convert? Why did you change? And he knew that Maharaj is beating around the bush. But at that time I was wondering why Maharaj is not directly answering the question. Why is he not taking the bull by the horns? But then I realized later on that Maharaj was actually very humble. He didn't want to reveal the real answer. But as this man kept persisting, and he kind of cornered Maharaj at one point of time, Maharaj, in all humility, he humbly looked down and he said, when this man said, why did you have to convert? If all paths are same, my question is simple. Why did you have to change from being a Jewish practitioner to a Hare Krishna sannyasi? So then Maharaj, in all humility, said, because Krishna attracted my heart like no one else. So that answer was amazing. I still haven't forgotten that meeting. So I remember this often, and I get strength. And this is the person who's experienced Krishna, and that's why he's able to accept everyone. And that acceptance, is what helps us come closer to Krishna. So this is one of the biggest things I've learned from Maharaj.
I think Maharaj, whenever he says in that lecture that, we unfortunately love things and use people.
Yeah.
I think Maharaj has been the example of actually loving people.
Yes.
Everyone can genuinely feel that he's seeing people as people and not as things to be used.
Yes, definitely.
You have been, I think, in your initial years, you have been leading the book marathons also.
Yeah.
I'm sure you might have a lot of experiences and realizations and your own empowerment that you received from pushing Prabhupada's books. Would you like to share anything of those years?
Yeah, my first 4 or 5 years of my ashram life, I spent time in distributing books, Srila Prabhupada. And I think book distribution is very good because it helped me understand the importance of three things at least I could see. Actually, I could experience them. First is humility. It's easy to talk about humility, but when people ignore you or people dismiss you, you are actually earning humility points. It's like you actually are humbled. And as C.S. Lewis says, humiliation for most people comes before humility. So we go through humiliation in book distribution, and that's very purifying actually. So humility is one excellent guaranteed gift of book distribution. Second is realizations. What I mean by realizations is, like there are many instances when somebody comes to you and he tells you about his life and they're struggling and they're suffering, and then we've read that in the books of how this world is a place of suffering. So I've seen that book distribution offers a lot of opportunities to get realizations in Krishna consciousness. What we read we can actually translate that and we can actually see it happening. So book distribution is a service which actually offers, it's like the glasses, it helps you see the world for what it is. It helps you to have the scriptural vision. That's the second. And the third is book distribution definitely gives you dependence on Krishna. Like when I'm giving a book to someone, I've seen this, and the person is just flipping through the pages. I'm desperate that he buys the book, but I can't tell him, please buy. I can't push the book down his throat. So what I do is I give the book in his hand, and as he's going through, I'm desperate. So what I do is I internally pray, Krishna, you are there in his heart as Paramatma. Krishna, please, please let him buy the book. Krishna, let him. And when he buys the book, you feel so grateful to Krishna. So see, basically, even if a person buys the book, he doesn't take the book, that is success, because you have depended on Krishna. You have come closer to Krishna. So I realized that, there are days when I came back with a score of 150 books, sometimes 170 books. And I came back thinking I'm a champion, who scored a century in a cricket match. I'm coming back to a standing ovation in the pavilion. A great achievement, but I didn't feel so Krishna conscious. But there are occasions when I did only 25, 30 books the whole day. But I was intensely praying and wishing somebody brought the book. And when I came back, I remember having I felt a sense of belongingness. I felt a sense of safety. I felt the warmth of, I guess, Krishna. I mean, I didn't know it is Krishna, but I felt safe. I felt loved. So I guess the dependence on Krishna is the best reward we get from book distribution. These are my three realizations from book distribution.
Humility, dependence on Krishna, and realizations.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
HRD. You can remember. Acronym, this is a world of acronyms.
Great. Puji, you were explaining to me the other day that, when devotees struggle with giving up sense gratification, which is like as monks and otherwise also, because this, especially in today's time when there is so much just at your fingertips, you can access. So how do you deal with it? Because sometimes on a conscious level, we are trying to be devotees. Consciously we know that we are supposed to do this, but our previous programming is still running. Internally, on a subconscious level, we are still not devotees. So sometimes that comes up, and then we succumb to sense gratification. How do you deal with that? You had explained to me this 5-part solution. Would you like to throw some light on it?
There are many solutions, Prabhu, but I personally think it's. I think we have kind of sometimes, hyped up the problem of sense gratification. We've everything becomes sense gratification. Even if you have good prasadam, you condemn yourself for having sense gratification. So if you are basically struggling, if your life is full of struggles, then Krishna consciousness will tire you out, and you will land up with a lot of sense gratification, an inordinate amount, because sense gratification, yuktahara viharasya. Krishna says, everything in the right amount is healthy. But when we generally overemphasize on the need to abandon sense gratification, then we land up with people who are struggling all the time, 24 hours. So if you live in the space of struggle, then it's like, it's tiring to the brain. Just like if you walk 21 kilometers during Govardhan Parikrama, your legs start paining after the end of the Parikrama, right? Then you don't chastise yourself for your legs paining. You say, it's okay, it's naturally, it will tire. Similarly, for morning to night, if you are saying no and you're making right choices, I have to choose Krishna consciousness, I have to hear a Bhagavatam class, I have to say no to WhatsApp, I have to say no to this, I have to choose deity worship. So our bhakti practices are all centered on directed attention. It is voluntary attention, it is not involuntary. Watching YouTube is involuntary, you can easily watch without endeavor. But bhakti practices for most of us, I'm not saying all of us, for most of us it's voluntary, it invokes voluntary attention, which means you have to make a choice, which means you have to say no to certain things. So that means at the end of the day, your brain is tired. Just like your legs are tired when you walk a lot, when you keep making conscious choices, your brain gets fatigued. And then instead of acknowledging that your mind is tired, just like your legs would be tired, you start chastising yourself by saying, what the hell, you are not a devotee, you are not able to pay attention, and then you try to pay more attention and you get more tired. It's like your legs are aching and you try to run more, your legs will break. Similarly, when you are tired mentally and then you try to pay more attention, your brain will break. You just can't do it. So my solution is completely different. What I generally propose to devotees is that please understand what are the activities which helps you connect to your higher self, not the lower self, but higher self, but activities that help you connect to your higher self, but which invokes your involuntary attention, which means those activities which help, for which you don't have to struggle to pay attention. Like for me, going on a nature walk invokes involuntary attention. Putting oil on my body, a massage, and then I apply oil and I relax and I inhale and exhale. I enter the space of sattva. That is involuntary attention. Reading poems and writing journals is involuntary attention. So I have a list of 10, 15 activities for which I don't have to struggle. So I ensure that every day I spend at least some time in that space where my involuntary attention, which helps me nourish my higher self, is invoked. I spend some time in that space. So that will give us a higher taste. And eventually, when we have a life centered on activities that require less tiredness to the brain, but more nourishment and more healthy, in that space we can eventually give up sense gratification. Unfortunately, we don't have a clear definition of sense gratification. Everything becomes sense gratification. Sometimes even giving a lecture becomes a sense gratification. So if you are living in a space where everything is a sense gratification, then you are a miserable person. Sometimes people are psyched up in bhakti. They worked up. So I think that's very unhealthy. I personally suggest to many devotees that if you really can't give up certain habits, that means there is a problem that you cannot solve repeatedly. Then my understanding is maybe it's not a problem to be solved. Maybe it's a truth to be accepted. So if sense gratification you're not able to overcome, then maybe sense gratification is not a problem that you need to solve. Maybe it's a truth that you need to accept. So you need to have some sense gratification in your life. So choose the situation, choose the services, or choose your situation in a way that you can have some of it in your life in a dharmic way and be happy about it. And pay the price for it. Everything comes with a price. So pay the price for it. So that's my take on it. Is that okay? Achyut Gopal Prabhu.
Yes. You had, I think in one of your lectures, you had explained few stories from cricket, life lessons. I think some of it was very nice, especially the one I think you told about Rahul Dravid taking one ball at a time. Can you just explain that, or any other story that is like very relevant and very practical in our life?
Yeah, cricket is a fascinating game, and especially being an Indian and born and brought up in India, we grew up watching cricket, playing cricket. So although I don't play or watch cricket now, for various reasons, it's been more than 2 decades now, but cricket has taught many lessons, life lessons, and that's why I wrote that book, Cricket in a Monastery, in a story form. Cricket, especially Test cricket, offers many amazing lessons. And one of the most amazing things about Test cricket is it lasts 5 days. And there are 3 sessions every day, right? Morning to lunch, and lunch to tea, and tea to the last session. So basically 15 sessions. And there are a lot of twists and turns in a Test match. So one session could be really bad for a batsman, but he has to just simply tolerate. He just can't get out. He just has to wait. And then the runs will come. Or if you're on the bowling side, the batsman may really smash you. You may be going through a difficult time, but if you persist, then the fortunes would swing in your favor. So Test match is all about patience. And that's exactly what life is all about, patience. So I have a great regard for Test cricket in that sense. It helps understand the lesson of patience. Secondly, cricket also, like Rahul Dravid's story, I had heard it in one of his own speeches where he said that he was about to be thrown out of the Indian team. He had been failing consistently. But in that historic match in Eden Gardens, when India won after being forced to follow on, he had come to bat, and the Australians were experts in sledging, were actually getting on his nerves. But he was focused on one ball at a time. He said, I don't care if I don't make it into the team the next match, but this one ball is what I have, and let me just play this ball. So I thought that's how our chanting is, that's how our devotional service is. This one Mahamantra that I'm chanting now is what I have to offer Krishna. If we take one day at a time, one moment at a time, I think that's what a cricket batsman does. So like that, there are many ways to look at a cricket, but we should be careful as practicing spiritualists that cricket has its limitations. Like MS Dhoni, he said this statement that when I'm not playing cricket, I don't like to talk about cricket. Virat Kohli said in an interview when he was asked what is the most important thing, so people thought he would say cricket, and they thought maybe he would talk about his wife. He said no, the most important thing is life, because life is much bigger. Cricket will end one day. So we have to see life from a much larger perspective, and if cricket helps us draw life lessons, great. But cricket per se, it's basically an entertainment sport. Unless, of course, you are playing and you are, it's part of your career, or you are actually playing it for recreation. That's another story. But when a lot of money is involved and a lot of betting is involved, and agents of Kali can take over. So we have to be careful about how far we stretch. But yes, cricket does help, because just like we can learn from. See that I've learned this, that there is everything in this world will teach you something.
Exactly.
There is nobody who can be so bad that he can't teach you anything. Similarly, there is nothing in this world that can't teach you anything. And cricket, for Indians, cricket is in their blood. And there are so many stories about so many cricketers. So yeah, we could learn a lot of life lessons from cricket as well.
Yes. So the one last question before we end.
Yes. Yeah.
If someone really wants to make a change in this world, bring about some transformation. So many people go through their own crisis, their own sufferings. So if someone really wants to make a difference in the life of people, what do you think that person should focus on? What do you think is that the most important thing your advice would be to such a person?
I read a nice quote which said, when I was young, I was very determined and smart. I wanted to change the world. And now I am old and wise. I want to change myself. So yes, the change that we seek to make in the world, I think it comes from first working on ourselves. So of course we have a need to contribute. Contribution is a human need. To serve, to leave behind a legacy is one of the most basic human needs. We all have a desire to serve and give back, which is very healthy. We need to do that. But as we work on contribution, we also need to connect to ourselves, because we can't give the world what we don't have. If you don't have something, you can only give what you have. Or if you are really an instrument in the Lord's hands, even if you don't have something, you can always be an instrument. Basically, we need to connect to ourselves. We need to connect to power. We need to connect to a source beyond ourselves. We generally live in our heads, in our tiny space here. So as long as we live in the I, me and mine space, we can't really make a transformation in this world. We need to live in a space beyond my desires, my needs. So if you really want to make an impact in this world, my understanding is we need to spend at least some time in the universe space, or the Krishna space, or the God space, in a space where there is nothing for me. Generally, we calculate everything in terms of what's in it for me. So such a person will not be able to make an impact. I'm not saying that we can't take care of our needs. I'm just saying that we need to spend some time in the space which is far beyond me. So that could be hearing Srimad Bhagavatam club, that could be hearing Krishna's glories, that could be chanting, that could be anything, that could be different things for different people. So when I'm willing to be small in the face of this giant, beautiful universe, when I'm willing to feel small and yet feel loved, when I'm tiny and yet I belong, that's when we can make an impact. But if I'm the center of the universe, if I have a whole thing filled up here, then we are full of ourselves, that we don't really make a positive impact in the world. We just simply carry our own inflated egos in different disguises. So I think the change will come when we work on ourselves and we focus more on making that small contribution, knowing our small tiny part in this universe and giving our best.
Thank you very much, bro.
Thank you, Achit Gopal Prabhu. I'm so happy to connect with you, and I'm sure this will be of service to the Goa devotees as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've been remembering them ever since I came to Goa last. I think I came in February,
Correct.
and February first week. I still remember February 4th or 5th. So 3rd, 4th, 5th, I was there. I really, once the pandemic ends, I want to come to Goa and spend some time with the devotees there. And if you allow me, I would like to come and serve all of you there.
Yes, most welcome. Yes, we'll be very happy to. So I'm very grateful that you took your precious time to spend time with us and to enlighten us and to express your heart here. So we'll be putting the social media links of Prabhuji below. So all of you all can also follow Prabhuji. And Prabhuji has a website also, the modern
yogaformodernage.com.
yogaformodernage.com. Yeah. So you can follow Prabhuji there. So very grateful to you, Prabhuji. Thank you very much for taking your precious time.
Thank you, Achyut Gopal Prabhu. I wish all the devotees in Goa a very happy Diwali coming up now very soon. And today, of course, is Dussehra. I also wish devotees a very safe year. Now, this has been a very, very challenging year for all the devotees. I pray that all devotees are healthy, safe, and spiritually ecstatic. Thank you, Achyut Gopal Prabhu.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.